Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Tuesday, November 11th, 2025. Ambassador Chaz Freeman will be with us in just a moment on what's behind Donald Trump, America or Israel first. But first, this. History tells us every market eventually falls. Currencies collapse. And look at where we are now. 37 trillion in national debt. Stocks at record highs defying gravity. So what happens next? Groceries, gas, housing, everything's going up. And this dollar, it buys less every day. When the system breaks, your stocks won't save you and your dollars won't either. But one thing will: gold. I've said it on my show for years. Gold survives collapse. Central bankers know this and billionaires know it. That's why they're buying more. Is it too late to buy or is it just the right time? Call my friends at Lear Capital to find out. Ask questions, get the free information. There's no pressure, and that's why I buy my gold and silver from Lear. And right now, you can get up to $20,000 in bonus metals with a qualified purchase. Call 800-511-4620 or go to LearJudgeNap.com today. Ambassador Freeman, welcome here, my dear friend. Before we get to America or Israel first and the government of Donald Trump, why was an ISIS monster greeted in the White House yesterday?
Well, I think President Trump had two objectives, one of which he achieved, which was to enlist Ahmed al-Shara, now the president of Syria, former jihadi and brutal murderer, in the cause of combating the Islamic State, the remnants of which still exist in Syria and Iraq. And of course, it has also metastasized into the Sahel, the northern region of sub-Saharan Africa. So he achieved that objective. There will be cooperation against ISIS. The second objective was to bolt Syria onto the so-called Abraham Accords. That is far more difficult and didn't happen. Israel doesn't have any agreed borders. It's a state that constantly expands, and it's expanding into Syria. It's also attempting to fragment Syria to make an alliance between the Druze along its border and the Kurds, the so-called Syrian Democratic forces in the Kurdish part of Syria. And these purposes are so closely at odds, so completely at odds with those of the Syrian state and Syria's other patron, Turkey, that I don't think they're very likely to be achieved. Anyway, they weren't at the meeting yesterday. So this is actually, Judge, not that uncommon in history. Churchill said he would make a pact with the devil if the devil would help him against Hitler. He did make a pact with Stalin, so did we, guilty of murdering far more many people than al-Shara did. The leaders of Israel, Begin and Shamir and others were all terrorists. They murdered people during the struggle to establish the Israeli state, and yet they were washed clean. And I guess if you're a terrorist and you win, you're no longer a terrorist.
I guess to George III, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, James Madison were terrorists.
Well, indeed. In fact, I think it's fair to say that our War of Independence, our Revolutionary War, was very much a civil war. And people don't realize that after our independence, about 1/3 of the European white population of what became the United States emigrated, went to Canada or the Bahamas or Australia or New Zealand or elsewhere. And that was because the terror on both sides was truly dreadful. People were murdered in their beds. There were women and children who were slaughtered. houses were burned down with people in them. So war is not pretty under any circumstances.
Here's an example of the split in the MAGA base. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene wants one of the president's staunchest supporters. I'll read this since it's a full screen. The new leader of Syria is a former al-Qaeda terrorist wanted by our government who was meeting with President Trump today, this is yesterday, at the White House on the U.S. Marine Corps' 250th anniversary. He rose to power in December 2024. Sanctions were lifted off Syria in June, and many Christians and minority groups have been killed before and after sanctions were lifted. Let me stop here. Here's her point. He's still a terrorist. He's still slaughtering Druze, Alawites, and Christians. I get it that war is a messy thing. War is hell, and you have to do these things to win. But do you still slaughter innocents after you win? That's her point. Let me finish.
No, it's a very valid point. The human rights situation in Syria is deplorable, and all of the groups you named are indeed being subjected to outrageous attacks by members of the coalition that supports al-Shara. That's true. So that is not an unfair criticism. I note, however, that Ms. Greene does not mention that the sanctions have been taken off Syria, and Shara got into the White House at the insistence of Israel.
Let me finish the screen. This is very interesting. Syria is the oldest home of Christianity outside of Israel. The Apostle Paul met Jesus on the road to Damascus. Yeah, one of the most famous New Testament scenes. I pray the persecution ends not only in Syria, but all around the world. However, I would really like to see nonstop meetings at the White House on domestic policy, not foreign policy and foreign countries' insiders. I get it, but I also get the fact that the MAGA base, the president's base, understands that yet again, he's doing this at the behest of Israel. Does Netanyahu have his eyes on Damascus, Ambassador?
Some of the people in his coalition do. They've talked about annexing Damascus. Israel's pushing its border very close to Damascus. It obviously is not comfortable with a Syria that has any military capability at all, even to defend itself, let alone attack Israel. So this is longstanding Israeli policy and part of the Greater Israel Project that people like Bezalel Smotrich advocate. They want to take all of Egypt, east of the Nile, part of Saudi Arabia, all of Jordan, all of Syria and Lebanon, and part of Iraq to join under their control. So this is not just a colonial venture by Europeans settling the Middle East. It's an imperial adventure too.
I'm going to segue into Venezuela for a couple of minutes, but as an introduction to that subject, here's the president of Colombia ranting and raving about a potential attack on Venezuela, an attack on Colombia, and he mentions Syria, cut number 8.
Un clan de pedófilos quiere acabar la democracia en Colombia.
A clan of pedophiles wants to end democracy in Colombia.
Pero ahí está la realidad.
Harsh, yes, but that's the reality. And so that the list doesn't come out, they send armored vehicles to kill fishermen from this city and to threaten the neighbor, whether dictator or not, how? That the people of Colombia are going to applaud if they invade their brother who is not the president but the people of Venezuela. A president of Colombia who does that, a president cursed by future generations because he will never be forgotten as a traitor. The government of Venezuela has made many criticisms, but I do not mock the people of Venezuela, nor do I set a trap so that the people of Venezuela fall into the snare of an invasion that is only after their oil. What they want is more greed and violence to turn this beautiful corner of the South American continent into a Syria and Iraq, a Libya full of slaves, of slave markets, of new black people. No, the list of Stein's friends, which they don't want to appear in the United States, wants to use us here with violence so that the people of the United States don't think about their own government, but instead become more xenophobic and racist. The ideas of a superior race and other false ideas, and they use us so they don't have to discuss their own problems.
Talk about candor. Will Russia aid Venezuela if and when the U.S. attacks?
Well, it already has begun transferring weapons. So we're told that some heavy lift aircraft have brought enhanced air defenses for Venezuela, and I think there is a real danger if we do get into a war with Venezuela that it will be like the Spanish Civil War was in the 1930s. A catalyst for a global conflict, and not just Russia. Other countries, neighboring countries, Brazil, very concerned about what we're doing with Venezuela, as obviously Colombia is, as we just heard. And, I think it's quite remarkable. Our president, who's only been in office for a very short time, has managed to make enemies of the major countries in Latin America. Our former closest cooperator, for example, in counter-narcotics, Colombia. Brazil is emerging as a counterweight to American influence, at least in South America. In the Caribbean basin, we have returned to the sorts of policies that we had at the beginning of the 20th century, where we just lorded it over everyone and invaded them and occupied them and displaced their governments. We have made an enemy of the two greatest countries in Africa, Nigeria, with 220 million people, headed toward 1 billion people by the end of the century, a major power in the making, South Africa, which we've also alienated. And let's not get into the mess in Europe, where Viktor Orban turns out to be our closest friend and just visited the Oval Office. We're still mired in the Ukraine conflict. The president's efforts to approach Russia have not worked. And we have at best a very chilly truce with China for 1 year, if that. And I think the world is basically, at this point, they're not laughing at us, as President Trump in his campaigns alleged they were, but they're wincing and they're concerned that they may be victimized by us. Mm. You just heard that from the president of Colombia.
Yes.
He tied it into the Epstein files, which I think is quite correct.
Yes.
I don't think he's right about the U.S. wanting to go after the oil. I think the main point here is a power play to show everybody that we can shove them around at will. And if we can do that with Venezuela, then Cuba will fall, we think, and so forth and so on.
But from your experience as an Assistant Secretary of Defense, can the United States successfully invade Venezuela, or is Donald Trump going to get us into another Vietnam?
Well, if we do invade, it will be another Vietnam, another Afghanistan. The record is very clear. We may have a wonderfully technologically advanced and disciplined military force, perhaps the most lethal on the planet, bar none, but we have no record of success against guerrilla warfare, which is what we would confront.
Back to the Middle East. Is Trump politically free to shed his mantle of Israel first, of a zealous support of Zionism?
On the contrary, because so many other factors are at work eroding his popularity. You can see the polls indicating this. Disapproval ratings are very high now. He's more dependent on his Zionist oligarch supporters than ever, and very much in their clutches. I don't see how he gets out from that.
What happens when the United States government puts the political needs and interests of a foreign country above the bona fide, legitimate, and promised needs of the American people?
Well, you get a domestic reaction, which Marjorie Taylor Greene exemplifies, even within the Republican establishment, which she's not part of. You get blowback from young people in the United States who think that they don't want anything at all to do with Israel, whether they're Jewish or Christian or whatever they are, and you get blowback across the board on the issue of whether the political elites listen to common folk or pay any attention to their requirements. You get results in elections like the one in New York City, which is basically a repudiation of the current American political establishment. But you also get reactions abroad. And I've talked a little bit about some of those. There's a sense of apprehension about that the United States may be, in fact, certifiably insane. And you have a powerful article by Max Boot, a Russian immigrant, neoconservative, very much on the right, in the Washington Post the other day, saying that the Trump foreign policy is simply impossible to explain. It is so incoherent and so malleable, so changeable, that no one can figure out what to do.
I think he shoots from the hip day by day. I agree with you. I don't think there's any coherent ideology or even goal except to satisfy the president's needs and urges from day to day. But look at all these special envoys he has appointed to bypass the Secretary of State. The personal antipathy that the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has for him is well known and well documented. His ambitions to succeed the president are well known and well documented. His hands can't be dirtied by any foreign policy failures of Donald Trump, because he'll have to attempt to account for them when he runs in 2028. And so we have the son-in-law, Jared Kushner, the buddy, Tom Barrack. There's another fellow in the Middle East name escaping me. And then, of course, there's Steve Witkoff. All these people are not FBI vetted, not Senate confirmed. They don't draw a salary. They don't work for the government, but they speak for the president to foreign leaders.
All true. This is the government. I mean, let's be honest. This is a corrupt businessman who has brought his cronies into the government, and they're all doing very, very well financially, piggybacking on the government and the policies of the government that they are able to redirect. So this is arguably the most corrupt government we've had since perhaps Ulysses S. Grant, right after our Civil War. So this doesn't generate much praise or enthusiasm from anyone other than those who are on the make inside the government.
Here's a member of the Knesset arguing that the government of Prime Minister Netanyahu is the most corrupt government Israel has had in the past 30 years. Chris, cut number 7.
I blame you, Benjamin Netanyahu. I blame you for the mindset in October. The greatest disaster this country has ever known happened on your watch. Even if you sleep with a clear conscience, we will not forget. We will cry out over the abandonment, and a state commission of inquiry will be established. I blame you, Netanyahu. Your personal corruption has become a national plague. Every corrupt person becomes your partner. The bigger the file you have on someone, the more convenient they are for you. I blame you, Netanyahu, because you have forgotten what it means to be Jewish. Trump returned hostages in your place, while you shamelessly were busy trying to get him to grant a pardon. I blame you, Netanyahu. Racism has always served you. It has torn us apart from within. You turned half the nation into an enemy. We will cleanse the poison you have poured here for 30 years. We will return to being a united society. I blame you, Netanyahu. I blame you, Netanyahu, yes.
Wow.
Powerful. There's he is on trial for egregious acts of corruption. I don't remember how many counts there are against him, but it's a large number. So I think many Israelis probably agree with that member of the Knesset.
Well, there is certainly the impulse there for a commission of investigation, which of course Netanyahu will resist mightily, because the crosshairs of that investigation will be on him as to how October 7th happened, and then how everything was handled thereafter, and how many opportunities he had to return the hostages, but instead chose the slaughter of genocide. I guess it's hopeless here in America as long as Donald Trump is president. I don't know. Far be it from me to wish the Democrats to control Congress, but it might be a break on his excesses.
Well, it's arguably unhealthy to have all three separate powers of the government dominated by the same group. And we have, let's not forget, we have a Supreme Court which is beholden to and responsive to Donald Trump. The Congress is a rubber stamp under him, basically. I held no brief for the Democrats. I think it's only recently that they've begun to make arguments for things as opposed to simply opposing Donald Trump, which doesn't get you that far. I suspect we'll have a mid-course correction in 2026 in the elections, and I think the president is well aware of that. And again, I think that drives him not to change his positions to take greater account of public opinion, but it drives him even closer into the embrace of the neoconservative oligarchs and Zionists who have been so generous to him with their campaign donations.
I guess we are stuck with someone who's beholden to his donors, one of whom he lauded in the Knesset as having, much to her embarrassment, I don't even know if this number is true, $60 billion in the bank. Oh, well, life goes on.
Yeah, and the constitutional cure for this is impeachment. But the Republican Party is behaving like a cult rather than like a serious policy formulating body. And it basically is impossible to hold the president accountable. So no one even tries. I suspect if the midterms do go the way that it looks they might, and the Democrats recover somewhat from their own mistakes, which have reduced them to the level that they're at, that they will mount a series of hearings. I think we're already hearing about this from Congressman Rabkin and others. Mount a serious series of hearings investigating the various impeachable offenses that the president has committed with impunity.
I don't want to ruin your breakfast, but the donor class in America has dispatched their folks in the U.S. to attempt to dissuade the departing MAGA supporters and get them to change their mind and come back to the MAGA camp. I think it's a miserable failure. I think one of their principal spokespersons is repellent and is repelling the MAGA supporters. And here's an example of that. Hang on to your chair. Cut number 6.
When we were hit on 9/11, we took a bigger hit than we took at Pearl Harbor. Are you aware of that? There's a lot of young people who aren't. They're being brainwashed to the opposite. If Stalin had had his way, America wouldn't have even existed. But we're told, no, Eisenhower was wrong. We're told Churchill's the bad guy. Hitler's misunderstood. And these guys, they are desperate for normal, regular Americans to debate them. To debate what? They belong in a mental institution. The point is, I despise them because they're trying to use the cover of conservatism in the American flag to justify the unjustifiable. We've seen their type before, Mr. and Mrs. America. We've seen it in Europe. We've seen it in Germany. We've seen it in the United States in the 1930s, although it wasn't this bad. They try to steal MAGA. They try to steal America first. But these people are reprobates. This is our generation's war. It's a non-fighting war. But it's more daunting. It's more complicated because it's from within. Abraham Lincoln talked about the enemy within. President Trump has talked about the enemy within. Well, they're here. We have a responsibility as tens of millions of patriotic, America-loving people to do what? To talk, to speak out, to reject people like this.
He's just furthering an obnoxious and repellent stereotype.
It's interesting. He did not mention McCarthyism, but he's indulging in something rather similar, which is, typical. When you don't have a serious intellectual argument to make, you demonize your opponents.
Right.
You go ad hominem, and that's basically what he's doing. And this kind of polarizing talk is exactly the opposite of what this country needs. Yes, we need an open discussion, but an open discussion is not advanced by hurling invective at people. It has to be civil, and it has to be serious. That was not a serious set of remarks. That was invective.
Has there been an open discussion on the floor of either the House or the Senate about whether we should invade Venezuela, about whether the president should be bombing these speedboats, about whether we should be giving Israel everything it wants? Of course not. These are all unilateral decisions made by the president, irrespective of what the laws and the Constitution say. The subject of his invective, of course, was Tucker Carlson.
Of course.
Tucker and I communicated over the weekend. Get ready, Mark, because Tucker's warming up. You'll be hearing from him very, very soon. We'll, of course, be watching it. My apologies to those who were repelled by Levin, but we have to show what the other side is attempting to do, particularly when it's so counterproductive for them. Counterproductive for them. How can this guy be considered by any stretch an attractive exponent of the president's views? He just repels people. Ambassador, thank you. Thanks for your time, my dear friend. Same time next week. We'll look forward to seeing you then.
Hope so. Okay.
All the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Coming up later today at 1 o'clock this afternoon on all of this, with Professor Deason at 1 o'clock, also on the maniacal conscriptions drafting that the Ukrainians are going through. At 2 o'clock, Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski, get ready for another Vietnam if we invade Venezuela. And on all these topics, who else? At 3 o'clock, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.